All right. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and read chapter 8. It's not as long as 7, but it's still, we're going to read the whole chapter 8 to get this vision and understanding. So, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before it, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west, across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. And it grew great even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. And it became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him. And the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking. And another holy one said to the one who spoke, For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up. He said, Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation. For it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. And the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the Prince of Princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true. But seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. So, we hear a lot of things in there that are similar to various other things that we have been reading and have read prior year in Revelation, this year already in Daniel in the first couple of visions. So it's interesting, the language continues to be stuff that we ought to be able to see little bits and pieces of. So, but at first reading, this chapter seems to be somewhat clear. Maybe it's just to me who I read it and read it and read it, and you read it after just reading the others, it seems to be reasonably clear. But as we get into the details, we will find out that this vision is widely misunderstood. Or maybe a better way to say it is that it's interpreted completely different based upon different viewpoints of other visions, different biases maybe. And I do think that this vision in this chapter is the most important, insightful prophecy about the end times. This thing leads us and tells us some really good information about these end times. From chapter 2 and 7, the Lord has introduced us to future kingdoms, including a future eternal kingdom. He even introduces us to a little horn that will be the leader of the final end times beast. But neither of those chapters, 2 or 7, give us enough insight into the details of how to recognize this final end times beast. But now in chapter 8, we get more. We get more details, we get more help. We'll see more detail to help us understand what to look for to be able to recognize the times and events of the end times. So, here in chapter 8, Daniel has a second vision. This was 2 years after the first vision. So, since we dated the first vision somewhere around 549 BC, then this one is 2 years later, somewhere around 547 BC, or almost exactly halfway of the reign of King Nabonidus. He had a 17-year reign, and remember, just a few years or sometime in his reign, he named his son the co-regent, because he was going on vacation. He was tired of kinging, so he named his son and told him, they called him king. So that's what that's all about, King Belshazzar. So in this vision, Daniel sees himself in a place called Susa. You might also see that same, yours might say Shushan. That's in the province of Elam, which is a province of Babylon, and is 200 miles east of the city of Babylon. So if you pulled out your map and looked at one of those maps of where you see Babylon, like any of these will do it. Any of these maps. You'll see on there, the one I've got Journeys of Abraham, but it's on the one that says the Middle East, then and now. You'll see Babylon in every one of them, kind of in the Fertile Crescent. And then you see Susa to the far right from that, right below Elam. So it's far east. It's far east. It's a couple hundred miles from Babylon, far to the east. Right? So that's the period. Daniel himself was in Babylon, right? But he sees himself in this vision. He finds himself in this place called Susa, or what can also be called Shushan. All right? So, at the time of this dream, Babylon was still the dominant force in the world, but its dominion was declining. Remember, it started around 605. They conquered, brought all these folks back to Babylon, and we've been going on for about 50 to 60 years. All right? We'll see shortly on the timeline that the clock is ticking on the reign of Babylon. So it's interesting that Daniel's vision puts him in Susa, which would become the actual administrative capital of the Persian Empire to come. So that's where he was in the vision itself. So it was not yet even a major city, but it ultimately would become one because of the kingdom of Persia. So you can see that mentioned in the book of Nehemiah, as that's where Nehemiah lived when he was commissioned by the king of Persia to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. It's also notable that Susa is where the book of Esther takes place. I'm sure you've all read the book of Esther. So This vision is another more detailed description of two of the kingdoms in the previous dreams, or so I think, so we think. Each vision shows us a little more about the future from Daniel's time. So these visions are so detailed that many folks have tried to say that the book of Daniel could not possibly have been written prior to the rise of these kingdoms. Many scholars or opponents of the Bible have tried to argue that these prophecies could not possibly have been written prior to them happening because they got it so right. They got it so right. So that's, but as we discussed, these things are not a problem for a God who is sovereign and knows what's going to happen prior to it happening. So also it is because these prophecies were so accurate that we can trust and believe that the ones that are still to come will prove to be true. That's so important for us as a testimony to who our God is and what He can say and what He knows. But all that, neither here nor there, there's still differing views of what this prophecy says. All right? There are three possible viewpoints. The classical historical view is that the ram and the goat are historical kingdoms and empires for us. All right? They're historical to us. And that the little horn is ultimately about the Antichrist at the future in this fourth kingdom. All right? So, but that there's an earlier type of Antichrist that is effectively a foreshadow of the actual Antichrist. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. This example of the Antichrist would be who is King Antiochus IV Epiphanes, which I'm sure you've all heard of. I'll mention him again in just a minute. All right, so this view would say that the little horn in chapter 8 is the same little horn that was discussed in chapter 7. Remember, I told you last week when you read to be looking to see what you think. So we're going to say, in this view, it's the same little horn. He's not different. All right, that's one view. The second historical view says that this little horn is not the same little horn from chapter 7, but a different one. This view says that this little horn is King Antiochus Epiphanes, who came out of the Seleucid Empire, which we will mention again in a few minutes. So this king reigned from 175 BC to 164 BC. So why would somebody want to say that? Why does somebody often, and this I'm going to caution you on it when you read, why does somebody often think something that's not necessarily what looks obvious? Most of the time it's because they have made their mind up about what it's going to say, and when it doesn't say exactly what they want it to say, they got to shoehorn it into what their theory is about what it is going to say. All right, so I'll come back and explain to that. I'll explain to that a little bit more. This view is taken from those who are adamant that the fourth beast and the legs of iron in Nebuchadnezzar's statue, not the fourth beast, but the fourth part of the statue, is the Roman Empire. And that the end times beast is coming out of Rome. And this chapter 8 clearly says that the end time, this little horn comes out of the empire of the Greeks, not out of Rome. So for them to read that and fit their Rome theory, they got to say this is a different guy, right? It's a different guy. So sometimes the Bible is hard to figure out, and that's why we study to try to decide what we think is going to happen. So you got to have all the pieces and all the parts of it. We're going to do that tonight, and I mean, believe me, we're going to do it, and it's difficult, but we're going to do it. All right. So the difference from the first view and the second view is whether Antiochus Epiphanes is the little horn or just a foreshadower type of little horn. All right. And we're going to find out he was a bad guy and he did a lot of things that this thing said it's going to do. But we're also going to find, the Bible always continually has foreshadowing, continual events that tell you just like what this final is going to be. There's one more view. The futurist view is that this vision is completely different from chapter 7, and all of it is still in our future. So people believe that. All of it is still in our future, no matter what Gabriel said about what this is going to be. This view would be that the ram and the goat have not appeared yet, and we'd be looking for them still. We can discuss that some, but I think that's not even worth discussing. So, because I think we have interpretation for a reason, and we're given information for a reason about it. So, I'm going to teach this from a classical historical view, which is that this little horn is the same little horn, because I believe that that's what it's truly saying. So we'll get to it, and I'll let you decide for yourself. And that's where it gets to, it's not just nothing spoon-fed when you're dealing with prophecy, because you got to read it and understand it and take the time. If we're trying to get to the answer, we want to see it for ourselves. So, anybody want to say anything or have a question about that? I know we've got a lot of detail. We're going to get into a lot of detail, but it demands it, and it gives it. The thing that's so beautiful about it is it gives us the detail that we can get information from. You know, I changed the way that I started reading my Bible probably within the last couple of years ago. I used to read it to get it read. I used to read it to get it read. I now read it to get information from every verse about what it says and what it's trying to tell me. And I use a pen. You ought to see my Bible. Not this one, because I'm now in one that's an NASB, and I got blue all over the place. And I just love it, because you can find stuff in every verse that you get information from. It's amazing. So, study it and just know that we're trying to get information from it. So let's go on. So the first thing Daniel saw, let's go back to the ram. The ram standing on the bank of the Ulai Canal. So this ram had two horns. Both were high, but one of them was higher. The higher one. So it's interesting to me how he's moved on down the line in the Babylonian kingdom, and basically the vision went from Nebuchadnezzar giving him information about Babylon. This vision he had last time gave him a little about Babylon, was mostly about these others, and now we're moving on, and he's even forgot Babylon. Let's move on to these next two, because this is what I'm trying to tell you, is what he's trying to say. This is what I'm trying to tell you. The higher one came up last. That information sounds exactly like the information we got in 7 about this Medo-Persian kingdom. So this makes you remember the bear, raised up on one side from Daniel's dream 2 years earlier. In this vision, it is a ram. The ram was charging westward and northward and southward. So that means it started in the east, I guess. That's in the east, because it's going in the other 3 directions. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could be rescued from his power. So this kingdom is east of Babylon, coming that way towards him. He did as he pleased and became great. All agree that the kingdom represented in the vision as a ram is the kingdom of Medo-Persia. But just to confirm it, the angel Gabriel was told to help Daniel understand the vision. In verse 20, he says that the ram is Media and Persia, and the 2 horns are the 2 kings. So he makes it pretty clear. Darius and Cyrus. So there's no question about this one. The kingdom reigned on the world stage for over 200 years. It's notable from history that in the Bundahesh, which is a Persian religious book, the guardian spirit of that kingdom was portrayed in the form of a ram with sharp pointed horns. Also, the Persian king wore a ram's head on his head when he stood before his army. So, one more thing about this vision. Daniel was sitting here at the end of the Babylonian Empire and can kind of see things happening and see things crumbling and see things headed. He probably could have seen the strengthening of this Medo and Persian Empire coming. They didn't just pop up overnight out of nowhere. So one might have predicted what was coming, since this was, 547, and the fall of Babylon happened within the next decade, right? So it wasn't that incredible of a prophecy, but it was still prophecy, and it did come true. So let's move on to the goat. So, as Daniel was considering the ram, a male goat came from the west across the whole face of the earth without touching the ground. Now this thing was incredible because no kingdom ever came from the west. No kingdom came from the west. Sitting in Israel, sitting in Babylon, Israel is to the west of Babylon. Israel is to the west of Medo-Persia Empire. Greece, now Macedonia, this empire way out on the Mediterranean is east, and no one ever came from, west, and no one ever came from the west. But this thing was moving so fast that it appeared to be flying. He had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. This thing aligns with the leopard with 4 wings from chapter 7. So with rapid speed, a powerful empire comes from the west and meets head on with the ram of Medo-Persia in 334 BC. So this goat, commonly known to be the Greek Empire, and the prominent horn is its first king, Alexander the Great. So we also know this from history, from our perspective, right? You'll also see in verse 21, as told by angel Gabriel, that the problem with the text, I told you this before on the other one, is that there was no Greek Empire at the time of this writing, even though your Bible probably says Greek, right? Greek Empire. Remember, it was from the original, it was something else in Macedonia called Javan, which ultimately became what was known as the Greek Empire, but it was not actually the Greek Empire at the time of the writing of the text. So that's just interesting and something to keep your mind on when you read your Bible. Sometimes you might have to go back and find some more detail from what was originally written. The original text uses the Hebrew word Yawan, or its English equivalent, Javan. Javan was one of the sons of Japheth, who was one of Noah's sons. That will become important to us in our last chapters 10, 11, and 12. That'll come back and mean something to us. But his family inhabited the islands around the Mediterranean Sea, including Macedonia and the land of Turkey. And he was the progenitor of the Greek race. So the Greek Empire appears to be correct, but there really was no Greek Empire at that time. So this prophecy really was incredible. No way Daniel could have known anything about a people from the west coming into power. It didn't happen until 200 years after he had died. All right? All kingdoms in Daniel's time came from the east. Nothing, like I said, came from the west. This was definitely a vision from God that was given to him. One additional piece of information is that the Greek god Pan was often depicted with legs and horns of a goat. No doubt about this goat being the Greek Empire. It's amazing the detail that the Lord knows. Alexander the Great became king after his father died, and he was exceedingly strong, but not for very long. At the height of his strength, in 323 BC, so this is 200 plus years after Daniel, at the height of his strength, at the age of 32, being in power less than 10 years, he died very quickly and suddenly of some mysterious illness. The scripture says in verse 8 that out of this kingdom, after the great horn was broken, 4 horns would grow out of the empire and go in all directions toward the 4 winds of heaven. Then we're told in verse 22 that 4 kingdoms will arise out of the one, but none would have the power of Greece under Alexander the Great. So, did that happen? All right, the nice thing is, from our perspective, we can look and see the history. When Alexander died, he left no immediate heirs. His wife, or maybe just girlfriend, named Roxanne, was pregnant at the time he died. As always happens with kings, dissension happened, as you might imagine. Some supported Alexander's bodyguard and close confidant, Perdiccas. Some supported Alexander's half-brother, Philip. Some supported waiting to see if the unborn child was a son. It was a son, and his name became Alexander IV. Ultimately, Alexander IV and Philip were appointed joint kings, but really in name only. Soon thereafter, all 4 Perdiccas, Alexander IV, Roxanne, and Philip were all assassinated. All dead. There were 40 years of war, which resulted in 4 stable family power blocks. That's where it gets to be important and something we ought to follow. Right? One of them was named Ptolemy. Ptolemy was given Egypt and adjacent territories. So that's to the south. Ptolemy. It starts with a P. P-T-O-L-E-M-Y. Ptolemy. Seleucus was given Syria, parts of Asia Minor, which is some of Turkey, and the east, like Iraq and Iran, so that's north. Lysimachus took control of what's called the Thrace, which is and adjoining territories, which is Turkey and some of the northern countries out to the west. Cassander ruled over Macedonia and the islands of the Mediterranean, further out to the west. All right? So far we found that this Greek Empire, they've led us to a place where this Greek Empire turns into these 4 kingdoms. And this ultimately becomes very important to us to try to figure out and trace what's going on. Because now we turn to this little horn. So, we've learned a lot in the last 2 pieces of this vision that we discussed, but all that part of the story is really background for what is really the point of the vision, right? So we're trying to get to what's the actual point of the vision. The point of the vision is the little horn. The hard part of the vision, and the part that should mean the most to us today, is the little horn. This part of the vision is very complicated, and many Bible scholars disagree on what it means. So remember back to my 2 points where you have to, let's read what it says, not decide what it says before we read it. Right? What are some of the key things that we did read that help us to understand maybe what this little horn is? There are a couple of key words in there that you should have picked up on that Gabriel told us. Somebody look at verse 17. What does it say?
So he came near to where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end.
All right. So then let's read further into verse 19. What does it say?
He said, Behold, I am going to let you know what will occur at the final period of indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end.
All right. Then let's read in verse 23. What does it say?
In the latter period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue.
All right. So how many times does he have to tell us that this thing is about the end for us to try to understand that what he's talking about and going to tell us is about the end? And then he's going to tell us some details that are going to distract us and make us think, well, he really wasn't saying it's about the end. It's about this other time and this other situation. But you can't discount the fact that he told us in no uncertain terms, and it appears to be the point of the whole vision is about this kingdom in the end, this 4th end time. That's what this whole thing, we read 7, it was about the end. We're reading 8, he's telling us it's about the end. And then when we read the details, we need to remember what we've been told about what it says. Because there's going to be a guy that arises that we just mentioned in the middle of the 100s BC that are going to do a lot of these things that look like maybe it's not about the end. So let's read about those things. Verse 17b says, let me see, Paul. Well, this is about the end again. The vision refers to the time of the end. I think this quote by the angel Gabriel tells us plainly the point of the vision is about the end times. But I want to tell you a couple of things that we got to understand properly too. Verse 19 says, Look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be. So, I know we read things and sometimes we glaze over them and don't really understand, and I can promise you nobody in here really knows what this indignation means, because when I read it, I'm like, that word is just not one I use, and I don't even know what's he really saying. And every time I got to go back and say, what's he talking about? So what is he talking about? What's the indignation?
Well, my Bible says, I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath.
All right, that's what that's the actual language. All right, so that's good. So what is it? Does anybody else say something different? Behold, I will make known to you what shall be the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. So the indignation is God's ultimate wrath provoked by the unfair treatment of his people. So there is a time when God will have seen his people be mistreated enough. He will then pour out his wrath on those who have been persecuting his people. There is a time that will be the time of the end. So you see what I'm saying? So what's that now saying? He's saying that time will come, that when he will have had enough at the latter end of the indignation. The Jewish people, the nation of Israel, are being mistreated by these beasts, these pagan empires, continually. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, all of them conquer and and rule over Israel. Ultimately, even Rome does. And then, and then we see it continuing today. But what he's saying with that word, with the indignation, is that he's finally at some point going to have had enough. And that's going to be a time of the end when this is going to happen, which lines up with everything we read in Revelation, everything we're reading about when this end is going to happen. So it's still pointing us to the end. All right? So then it says one more thing I'm going to ask you. It says, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise. All right? What's that saying? Who are the transgressors? What are transgressors? Sinners? Disobedient? Idolaters? You know, every kind of... Who's he talking about? He's talking about his people. He's talking about the Jews. He's talking about the nation of Israel. The Jewish people are the transgressors. And they are, why are they in the situation that they're in? They're in the situation of being conquered continually over and over because of their transgression. Because they continue to be disobedient. They got into this in the first place because of this transgression. But the funny thing is, God's still mad and going to ultimately pour out his wrath on those that are conquering his people, even though he's allowed it to happen because of their transgression. So, but it's at the end when this is going to happen. It's still today at the end. It's still today in our future. You know, we can look forward to the day when Israel is going to sit, but the indignation is not over. And the transgression is not over. And we're going to get to chapter 9. I keep pointing to chapter 9. Chapter 9 is the most incredible 4 verses that give us exactly what's happening and how it's going to unfold. And it's about that all that doesn't get cured until the end. All that doesn't get cured until the end, which is why you can't help to me but look at this chapter 8 and this little horn and understand it's about the end, even though it ultimately is confusing because of this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, that is such a bad guy and all the things he did. So, somebody's bound to want to say something about that.
I guess I'm just trying to understand. So what you're suggesting is that God will pour out his wrath on the transgressors to the chosen people who are Israel. Even
not pour out his wrath. He is allowing things to happen to them. He's not pouring out his wrath. I look at that as ultimate destruction. That's not what he's doing, destroying them. He's just allowing them to be in their such situation under the thumb of all these people that are conquering and controlling them. I don't think he pours out his wrath except on in ultimate destruction against those that are treating his people poorly.
Does any of that relate with because it says when they've reached their fullness, is that like when the Gentiles have they've got the Jewish people kind of been blocked or have a blind eyes until the fullness of the Gentiles?
So the language you're talking about is the language we see in a couple different places in the Bible. It's talking about the fullness of the Gentiles. And when it says when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in or is over, and I think there is a period of time where the Jewish people in the nation of Israel is being blinded. They put in a stupor, and they're in the middle of it right now. After Jesus came, and all that disobedience and all that happened, he put them in a stupor. And just like you said, it talks about it in Romans. If you want to read Romans 9, 10, 11, it talks about it continuously. And that is for this period of the Gentiles that we are currently in even now, for the church. Ultimately, the Gentiles, the last Gentile believer is going to happen, going to come. And when that happens, it's going to be at the end of this period where he's going to come back, and there's going to be a remnant of Jews that he's going to save based on the fact that they have not given up on God, even though they've been in the middle of this disbelief at this point. It's a short way to answer, but that's the whole study, I guess, on itself. But if you want to read about exactly what it said, read Romans 9, 10, 11, because he tells you all those things you just said. And then in like Revelation 10 or 11, it talks about right around the time of the seventh trumpet, it talks about the end of the mystery is done, no more delay, and that's the end of the Gentile period right there. It's talking about. So there's a dual thing happening here at the end. God will be pouring out his judgment on the unbelieving nation of Israel by way of allowing them to be persecuted like never before. That's what the tribulation period is. And this will happen during the Great Tribulation, but there will be a remnant that will ultimately be protected and saved, which is what you're just asking about. So he also mentions in here something about the desolation, right? In verse, what verse does it say in here something about the desolation? It does in 9, but it said in 8 when we were reading it, it talked about that, which is another. The abomination of desolation is one of the things that puts us in this final 7 years. It's the midpoint, and whenever it's spoken of, that's what it's referring to. And Jesus in Matthew 24 verse 15 speaks of it in the future, which means even in his day it had not happened yet. So it can't be Antiochus Epiphanes, who happened before Jesus. He was in 170 something BC. So one more clue in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, 3 and 4, Paul puts the abomination of desolation in his future as well. So he's referring, this lets us know that this guy is in our future, in their future, in our future. It's not Antiochus Epiphanes, although if we read all these things, we're going to say, man, I can understand why somebody would say it was him. All right, so first off, when you read about a little horn, it ought to ring a bell. And I don't think he's trying to trick us. So when you say in 7, it's talking about this little horn, and then when you say in 8, we're talking about a little horn. I don't think he's trying to give us 2 stories about 2 little horns. He didn't say another little horn. You'll notice when we're in Revelation, we said we read about the beast, and then we read about a second beast. Well, he would have said, I'm reading about a second little horn. That's not what he said. I think he's talking about this same one. And I keep beating it to a pulp because it either is talking about this, and if it's talking about this end times Antichrist, then it leads us to where he comes from. That's the point. It comes out of this one of the Greek empire places. If it is, that's what we're looking for. And that's going to lead us to a place where we're going to find where he's coming from. All right, so bottom line is you've got to decide for yourself, is this little horn the same little horn as in 7? All right, like I said, people that want something different, find something different. So let's talk about the little horn specifically. What does it say? Let's try and understand exactly what it says to make our determination about whether this little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes or is he the Antichrist. So I got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 things about it. And we'll see. So it came out of one of the four horns that arose from the divided Greek Empire after Alexander the Great, it said. So Antiochus came out of the Seleucid Empire. He did come out of the Seleucid Empire. All right? Which was one of the four kingdoms. All right? The Antichrist, we don't know. We don't know. But if these we'll come back to that. So it grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. All right? Antiochus did indeed expand his kingdom during his reign. He led the Seleucid Empire and he expanded it during his reign. Don't know yet how that applies to Antichrist. So it grew great even to the host of heaven. Don't know how to answer that one. Some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. So Antiochus did strike down and trample on the saints of God, even the high priest Onias, in 170 BC. It became great, even as great as the prince of hosts. So this might be better understood to be saying he exalted himself as high as the prince of hosts. So this is a little tricky with Antiochus. He did try to stop the Jews from practicing Judaism in their land. He did awful things to them and to the temple as a way of trying to stop them from doing their religious things. He really did try and fit that thing and try to do things, but I don't think he did what was the abomination of desolation, himself standing in the temple and saying he was God. It says, and the regular burnt offering was taken away. So Antiochus did try and force the Jews to adopt Greek religious practices. He banned sacrifices at the temple. All right? And the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. Antiochus made the temple a temple of Jupiter and set up his image in it. And a host will be given over to it together with regular burnt offering because of transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Antiochus took charge of the temple and sacrificed a pig on the altar and burned the book of the law. He's trying his best to fit, or they're trying to fit him into this, all these characteristics. And at the later end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. So, this is where it starts to differentiate. Antiochus came to power 175 BC, which was not nearly at the latter end of the Greek Empire. All right? His power shall be great, but not by his own power. Don't know how you do that with Antiochus. He shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does. This guy was the insane king who inflicted terrible persecution on them. It says he will destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. He did kill many saints. I think like 80,000 believers he killed in Jerusalem. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. That's so vague, I'm not sure. Without warning he shall destroy many. Again, he destroyed people, but it's very vague, not sure how to do it. And then last, he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. So this dude was bad, and he was terrible to the people. I don't see any reference that he ever challenged God directly and stood there and said that he was God. Now, I know that's just way too much detail and stuff, and you might have all that detail in there or those things, and you can look at it, but what you got to do is make your mind up as to whether or not this little horn is this guy or is he the Antichrist. So, I think There's a few things that he doesn't fit as bad as he was, and I think it's too evident that it's talking about the end times in so many respects that I can't believe that this foreshadowing guy was really anything other than that, which is a foreshadowing king that does not fit all the attributes of the Antichrist. I think he was a very close type of Antichrist, but my conclusion is that the little horn is the same one from chapter 7 and is indeed the Antichrist.
Gordon, so the reason that some are saying that it's not the Antichrist is because of the region that it came from?
Because it
So they're
says,
trying to fit that.
because this little horn comes out of the Seleucid Empire ultimately. And if this little horn is the Antichrist, then you got to believe that the Antichrist we are looking for, if we're here when he comes on the scene, has to come out of the Seleucid Empire. And if we believe this fourth beast and this end times guy is going to be Roman, then that doesn't fit. And it has to fit, right? It has to fit. So if I can make this not be the Antichrist, if I can make this little horn be Antiochus Epiphanes, then I don't have to reconcile it with him coming out of the Seleucid Empire. And I can't tell you, that's all a lot of detail. I know, and it's, but the bottom line is, we today are trying to understand in our world what is going on and what's going to be happening. And when you look to me at this Roman Empire theory versus Islam, the things I read line up to more towards the Islamic, Middle Eastern, all these things. And I don't know how you're going to displace Islam anyway. I don't know how somebody could displace it from this end time situation, and that an Antichrist is going to come up and dominate and control Islam. I don't see how that could happen, even if I did believe it was wrong. So, can anybody help? I mean, has anybody ever just thought? And it's so important, because who are the players we're looking for to be part of what we're looking for to be, so that we'll know where we are in end times. We're looking to try to identify the folks that we ought to be concerned about joining the peace treaty or being a part of it. If I saw, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we all grew up, it was like there's going to be this 10, what is it called? European Union. 10 country European Union. Okay, I believed it. Islam was in check. It's not in check anymore. It's taken over. It's taken over Europe. It's taken over. How would somebody get control of all that in the Middle East, all around Israel, and be something that they're not a part of? I don't get it. I don't get it.
One thing that I think, and again, this is just me on my side, but whoever comes into control is gonna unite a whole lot of people. They're gonna unite people who are maybe Protestant people who are not sure what side of the fence they're on yet, because part of what God's doing during this time is pushing people to choose. He says, I don't want you to be hot or cold. You gotta make a choice. You gotta make a choice. And at some point, somebody's gotta come into play and bring all that together. And, I don't see, to me it makes sense that if it's Islam coming up, somehow Rome connects with that and helps almost be in partnership almost. I don't know a better way to say it. But to me that seems like it could be very what's the word I'm looking for, you know, make it be something that people can get behind and say, yeah,
Palatable.
I, yeah, I can support that. Makes sense to me.
You know, the countries that, if you can find all over the Old Testament, the countries that are ultimately destroyed and are going to be punished as part of this end times, and they are Edom, Moab, Cush, all these places are Middle Eastern, it's Egypt and Sudan and Jordan and Syria. I mean, it's all these countries right around, and they're all Islamic at this point. They are not Roman Catholic, you know, and but I can see, at least it was saying, you know, there's a second beast, which is the false prophet. There's some kind of one world religion, but I don't see Islam falling for that. That's not what they want. You know, I see people that are non-religious, universal religion, they can join together and everybody be happy, kumbaya and all that stuff. Islam's not doing that. They're not doing that. So somehow, maybe they join together and the Pope gives them credence. I don't know, because the Roman Catholic Church is, you know, got 2 billion people but, you know, some of them are Christian people. I mean, some of them are believing Christian people. Islam is just completely opposed. And all they want is to destroy Israel and everything about our God. You know? So I just don't get it. But ultimately, you've got to read this and try to decide, okay, it makes more sense to me that this little horn is the same little horn. If it is, we're talking about an end time little horn. If we're talking about an end time little horn, then they say he comes out of the Greek Empire. So that's just all there is to it. If he comes out of the Greek Empire, then we can follow the next trail and see what the next information is and try to figure out what's going on. And we're going to do it. And we're going to look at maps and we're going to read. We're going to get further. You're not going to believe what we're going to do in 10, 11, 12. Because this final prophecy, when we get to the end, and it is really detailed. I think you've got a narrative back there where chapter 11, I took all the pronouns and put people in it. And it'll blow your mind what that says, but ultimately it leads you right down the trail of the Greek Empire, the Seleucid Empire, and tells you exactly where this dude's coming from. But if it's not this little horn, then all of a sudden you got to try to figure out what in the world we're talking about. But ultimately we'll get there. So I'm sorry this was that kind of confusing, and kind of detailed, but it just and when you read the Bible, there are over and over again stories that repeat themselves, and you see foreshadowing. You see a type of Antichrist. The spirit of the Antichrist has been in the world since the beginning. That's Satan backing that. It's the spirit of the Antichrist, which is pagan, against God, against God's people, against His plans, and is continually like that. And God continues to show the pattern of what's going to happen, and we're headed towards this ultimate destruction of the Antichrist at this later date, which is where this is pointing.
Does verse 14 mean anything?
Read it.
He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be reached.
I'm glad you brought that up, but no, I have no idea what 2,300. I have not in anywhere I've studied, and believe me, I have spent lots of time trying to figure out what that 2,300 evenings and mornings, and it's all over the board what people think, because nobody knows what it means. But it says it, and then at the end it says it pretty clearly that the vision of evenings and mornings has been told is true. Seal up the vision for a verse of many days from now. I don't know I can't reconcile that number. Some have speculated that it's 2,300 evenings and mornings, which is really 1,150 days, right? So it's 1,150 evenings, 1,150 mornings would be 2,300 evenings and mornings total, which is 1,150 days. But I don't know how that number reconciles to anything. I've tried to get that. I've tried to figure it out. I've tried to read what people say. I have no way of being able to say anything about it because I can't figure out what it means.
It's either 6.3 years or 3.15 years.
Right.
That number doesn't.
It doesn't reconcile anything, so I don't know. So if anybody wants to go try to find that, I would love to hear the answer to that. And he said to me, 20 evenings mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. I don't know. I don't know. I do know that at the end of the tribulation period, the Great Tribulation, at the end of that period, whatever time that is, we're going to have a period of a millennium, and in that millennium there's going to be a temple. If you want to read about the temple and that, you go to Ezekiel and you'll get all the detail you want. Ezekiel 40 through 48, and it'll read, I'm telling you, you won't believe the detail. 8 chapters, maybe that's 9 chapters, of all the detail that nobody can really possibly, definitely specifically point, but most people think that is the temple in the millennium. Now Jesus is here ruling and reigning on earth in Jerusalem during that time, but there will be a temple. There will be a temple during that time, and that's what that's going to be. We'll come back, we're going to end our whole lesson with Ezekiel 38 and 39 just before that, which I think will show that the next thing is that. But anyway, those days lead up to that, but I don't know what that 2300 reconciles to. I can't get it.
But he said to seal it up.
Yeah.
It concerns the distribution.
He sealed it up.
That's why he sealed it up.
And I'm like Daniel at the very end when it says, and Daniel did not understand it. I did not understand it. And we're going to read one later where Daniel says, I understood the vision. And then we're going to be like, yeah, right, he didn't understand it. I'm going to tell you, he didn't understand it. Because it gets way more, unfortunately it's detailed. In prophecy, so if you got to stay with it if you're trying to get something out of it. But next time we'll get to Daniel 5, which is back to story, out of prophecy for a week. We'll be back to story, handwriting on the wall. Then we'll get to 9. We'll probably get into 9 next week, maybe halfway, which is not prophecy. And then we'll start prophecy again on 9. So I will tell you, we'll be here next week, right? And then going, right? Lisa and I are going to Israel, October 24th. We'll be gone for 12 days. We'll be back November 4th. So we're going.
So y'all have 2 weeks break.
We'll have a 2-week break. So we will be here next week, and then we'll come back. We will finish this thing before Christmas, though. So please don't check out on me after next week. But after next week, and then we'll have 2 weeks because we're not going to be gone 2 weeks quite, but we'll be gone 2 Mondays.
We meet the Monday, the Young Life Banquet, that Monday, the 4th, November 4th, is that right?
We'll be
So
gone.
the 3rd will be gone.
The 3rd is
Yeah.
Monday, the 4th is Tuesday, we come back.
Okay, so you'll be out.
Yeah.
We'll be back on the 10th. So we'll
Yes,
have
we'll
it
be gone the 27th, and we'll be gone
The
November 3rd,
3rd.
and then we'll be back
on the
on
10th.
the 10th.
So next week, so please read 5 and at least read half of 9. The back half of 9 is the prophecy about these verses, which is really the incredible. It's only 4 verses, that part of it, but the story about what Daniel is doing and his prayer. It's a great chapter 9. But 5 is just back to a story about the king and the handwriting on the wall, which is always just a neat back out of prophecy. So. All right, let me turn it off.
You want to pray?
Yeah, I'm gonna pray, but all right, let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for your word, Lord, which is so specific. Sometimes it's so detailed we have trouble keeping up with it. Sometimes but it's so detailed, Lord. It proves so accurate, and we know because of history. We know because that it's going to continue to be accurate, Lord. Help us to read it correctly. Help us to understand it correctly. Help us to lead us to the place you want us to see truth. That's what we're after. We're after truth and what your word says. We want to be prepared and ready and able to be on the lookout for what you want us to know and see in our times, Lord. Help us to enjoy getting into your word as we do more and more, Lord. We just thank you for these people that keep coming back, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Yeah, I'm sorry.